We're ready to go on stage to do our conversation with our religious leaders. We have Reverend Wendy Lambert from St. Luke's Methodist Church here.
All right.
Yes.
So we'll see you all out there.
Here we go. Bye, Delaney.
All right.
See you later.
Have fun.
Hi, guys. The orchestra, April, the camo, and the crew. And Hannah's going to be the voice from above.
Whenever you're ready.
Is it already on or do I?
Hello, everyone. Please give a warm welcome to Director of Development, Charlie Ludden.
Yay!
All right, we're going to come in. Thank you all for being here early. We are having our religious leaders conversation, and I am here with Reverend Wendy Lambert, who is a friend, my pastor, and former boss. So we did this whole thing because Michael was getting ready to do Joseph. And instead of it just being the ideas that are in Michael's head, if you ever met Michael, there's a lot of ideas in Michael's head. And he said, I need help. So instead of just figuring it out on his own, he decides to call religious leaders from our community and talk to them about the Joseph story. And he learned a lot of things, and we thought it was a great time to, not only for him to learn about it, but also give you all the opportunity to hear from some of our religious leaders here. So Wendy has signed up to be here today, so I'm pulling out my phone not to text or be rude. I have my questions on here, so I will pull these out and we will get started. So first off, tell them about you and your church.
I am Wendy Lambert. I'm one of the pastors on staff at St. Luke's, and
There we go.
I could not see it because of the lights, but it is good to be among friends, among Oklahomans, and I'm sure we're all cheering for the Thunder for tomorrow night and hopeful for that. St. Luke's is just a few blocks from here, and we were formed on the first Sunday after the land run. All the Methodists gathered together on the Sunday after they had arrived, and we established our church on Broadway. And so we have that kinship to this kind of performance. So I'm very glad to be here tonight.
Awesome, thank you so much. Let's get into some of the questions. So one of the questions I want to ask you, especially when you start talking about stories like this, you kind of find who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. So my question for you is, do you think Joseph's the hero in this story?
I think Joseph does some heroic things in the Bible story. I think that he is very much a character in the Bible, a person in the Bible that is typical for Bible stories. And one of the things I appreciate is they show the real humanity. Joseph does some heroic things, but he's also very humanly flawed. And you see the messy story. And if you read the book of Genesis in the Bible, you see how messy things get. And not all of it is his fault. He certainly wasn't treated well at different times in his life. But at certain times of his life, he didn't help his own situation. So I love that the Bible tells his story and shows Joseph for who he is. I do think he does some great things. He also does some things that are true to his nature.
It's a pretty questionable decision making. For you all that don't know me, I was a former children and youth leader at St. Luke's, and Wendy was my boss at the time. I struggled with some of the imperfect people in the Bible, which I think we get these stories to show us that we don't have to be perfect people. But as I'm learning, I'm like, well, why did you do that? That makes no sense. So those flawed individuals are for us to learn. And to me, I'm like, you had it all. You just messed it up. But I think in our scripture text, it helps us to see that, you know what, these people are human. They have their flaws. You are human. You have your flaws. But God is still with you and still loves you the whole time. So
I also think that in today's age, we see people who do heroic things. We put them up on pedestals, and we think every aspect of their life should be perfect. Well, if they're human, I guarantee that they're not perfect. They are flawed like all of us are. We all make mistakes. And sometimes we should give people a little bit more room to be human.
Yeah, there's this word called grace that I'm still working on in my life, but thankfully in our faith, this grace is already there, so that's always wonderful. Thank you. That's one of those things. Are there important things to know from the Bible to help in understanding this music?
I think, again, I can't recommend it enough to go back home and read the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, and you see how Joseph gets to be Joseph. Joseph is a descendant of Abraham, who is a spiritual ancestor for the three major faith groups of Judaism, of Christianity, and for the Muslim faith. We all trace our roots back to Abraham, and Abraham did some heroic things, but was really flawed. Time after time, if he would go to another country with his beautiful wife Sarah, he kept lying about her, saying she was his sister, and it would get, he did it for his own protection, never mind what was going to happen for his wife. That was just many of the things that he did. He had a son Ishmael and a son Isaac, and Isaac was the one he really favored. Isaac would get married to Rebekah, and Rebekah gave birth to twins, Esau and Jacob. And Isaac preferred his son Esau, that was the firstborn twin, and Rebekah preferred her son Jacob. Now, anytime parents out and out prefer one of their children over another, it causes huge problems. And so you see this in Joseph's father, Jacob, because Jacob would swindle his own brother out of his inheritance. And then toward the end of Isaac's life, when his eyesight was dim, he sent his son Esau out into the land to hunt some game. In the meantime, Rebekah had heard that, and she tricked her husband by dressing Joseph up to smell and feel like his brother Esau. It's interesting because later on, it would be Jacob who is tricked by his sons by the coat of many colors that was torn and had blood on it. He was tricked himself. So Jacob was part of this, and he prefers, of all of his sons, he prefers Joseph. Now, whenever we've talked about preferring one child at our church, I will have people come up to me, sometimes in their 80s, and they will talk about the incredible pain they still have because their parents preferred one child over them, or that they were the favorite child. And the guilt that they felt over that. It's a huge family dynamic problem in Genesis and still today. And so I think understanding that it didn't just start with Joseph. Bad parenting happened several generations before, and it kept happening. And so you see Joseph, who receives this coat of many colors, that's a fancy coat that none of the other brothers get. And you can tell the brothers don't like him. Why? Because they want their father to love them as much, and he clearly prefers Joseph. Well, what does a young child do to get the attention of his siblings? If they don't naturally warm up to him, he bugs them, and he starts telling them the dreams where they're going to worship and bow down to him. The brothers obviously didn't take well to that, and so you can see it starts with the parents. And the worst thing about favoring one child over another is not just the fact how wrong that is from the parent-to-child relationship, but it absolutely destroys any chance of good sibling connection. And instead of having brothers, they became adversaries.
I think it's very interesting, and I'm glad you mentioned it because I brought this up in the last two talks we've had. with Jacob, so when I grew up, I related to Esau, mainly because I'm big. He was the bigger of the brothers. He was the larger one. So I was like, yeah, Esau, and he was done unjustly, so it always bothered me. But it's interesting to me that in that story, you have Jacob being the prodigal son that comes back. And then in this story with Joseph, for Jacob's life, he now comes back to his son into the new land. So it's very interesting to see how, even with the story being about Joseph, Jacob's story does not end when he's getting older. He still returns and has to travel back to family in a different way. So I think it's really cool in that way. I'm going a little off script on this one, not to throw anyone off, but one of the things I think is really cool there, in pop culture, there are tons of musicals that have religious backings. You have Children of Eden, Jesus Christ Superstar, Joseph, there's so many out there. And St. Luke's does a really cool thing called St. Luke's on Broadway. Tell them a little bit about that.
I think it was back in 2014, we started a sermon series, St. Luke's on Broadway. And just so you know, behind the scenes, every sermon series that happens at St. Luke's is packaging. Because it all boils down every week, what is the problem that we need to address, and what does God have to say about it? And then the sermon series is built as packaging around that. But every Sunday, that's the heart of the matter. What's the problem, and what does God say we need to do about it? Well, if you look at the Broadway shows, there's great human life stories. There are some that are definitely religious, but there are some that are just human nature stories that provide a great opportunity to talk about the lessons that we all deal with. So from West Side Story, you have South Pacific, you have Hamilton. How do we treat one another, and what should be the direction and focus of our life?
Absolutely. It's so cool. I love that pop culture is used as a way to introduce people into faith in different ways, wherever they may be in their faith journeys, or not in a faith journey at all, but how that can kind of tie in for a show like this. It's just fun, uplifting, and also it's going to teach you a little bit. It's like Sunday school again. You go in there and you listen, and you're like, you know, I did learn a little bit, but I also enjoyed that coloring sheet I had, but we learned something there. So it's always fun how you can engage with certain things. So
we do 3 songs from the Broadway show, and just to help provide story. But then the sermon is about what does God say about the human problem.
So great. So back to Joseph. Do you think there are correlations with ancient stories of Joseph that still ring true today?
Absolutely. I think family dynamics and how we treat one another, that's something. So the story of Joseph is more than 3,000 years old. And there's probably little from that historical time that we can correlate with except human relations. And how we parent our children, how we treat our siblings, how we show kindness and the benefit of the doubt to one another is very applicable today as it was then.
There's so many different things that we learn in the Bible that if we take a moment and just think about what's happening right now, where can we learn this lesson of how to do better, how can we treat each other better, and make a better way for so many other people around us. Another question I have for you is, I guess it's more personal for you, so how do you feel about all the different various uses of biblical text, scripture, in pop culture? Some people are like, let the Bible be the Bible, we don't need that, it told us into a story. I think I know what you're going to say, but like when you're able to make all these musicals, do you think that's right? Do you think it's wrong? How do you feel about these fun musicals turned into one-stage moments or used to teaching other people?
I think the Bible is for everyone, even for people who don't believe in God. I would hope that they could find lots of story and material in the Bible for stories to tell. I'm always glad for it to be told. And it sometimes leads you to better study or an awareness. I'll never forget growing up as a child watching the 10 Commandments with Will Brenner and Charlton Heston.
Every Easter Sunday, I think is what it was.
Yes. I will never ever picture a pharaoh in mind except that he looks and sounds like Will Brenner. And I remember as a young adult, really trying to read the Bible, and I couldn't find the romance story of Moses and the Egyptian woman. I was trying to find it, and so I do think it helps to go back and identify what is the Bible story, what is the drama that might be added for dialogue or those kind of purposes. But I'm always glad for Bible stories to be shared.
That's great. I think one of the other religious leaders mentioned is this story is a great story to like listen to it, hear it, and have those thoughts. And then it gives you a little ammunition to go home, maybe crack open a book and like read a little bit more to figure out what happens to the next part of that story. It doesn't just, the story of Joseph doesn't stop when the family shows up. Well, spoiler alerts, you'll find out about it if you don't already know. But it's one of those things where it doesn't stop there. So that gives you the opportunity and that avenue to go, well, I'm curious, what else happens? And that's when you can go and do some research, open the Bible, find out what more is going on and those kind of things like that. Tell me a little bit about what you, let's go with, as a religious leader, what lessons do you hope people will take away from this musical? As they're watching today, before it even starts, what do you want them to kind of see what's happening and then take it away when they go home?
Well, I do hope that you pay attention to the relationships between people and apply that to your own lives, because so much of the time what catches us up or what we stumble on are our own emotions. We get upset, we get angry. Instead of stepping back to really analyze why we're angry and understand what the true reason is, we get mad at the person who might have cut us off in traffic, and we forget that we're really angry at ourselves because we got up late, we didn't get our coffee, and it was a series of little frustrations until the point we blow up at somebody, instead of reasoning what's really going on. For Joseph's brothers, they weren't really mad at Joseph. They were irritated and annoyed by him because, he told them dreams that they were going to bow down to him. But truthfully, they were really hurt by their father. Now, they wanted their father's love and attention, and so they didn't confront him, and probably that wasn't done at that time. And so they took their feelings out on their brother, but that wasn't the source of their anger. So first, having that sense of think through your emotions before you judge someone in the wrong way. The other part of this story, if you read the entire book of Genesis, you'll see that this is what gets the Hebrew people into slavery in Egypt. So this story is set in Egypt, and after several generations, it talks about there was a Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph. He forgot the story. And the Hebrew people had grown so well in that area that they were frightening the local people, and so they were put into slavery. And that would go off into the Moses story that we're familiar with. But one of the things I love about that kind of art is that we know, if we watch the Ten Commandments or we know the story about Moses, we kind of think Moses is the good guy and the Egyptians are the bad guys. That is not the way of God. And throughout the Old Testament, you have God reminding the people of their time in Egypt. They're meant to be reminded of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph, all of those stories, as well as the story that brings them out of Egypt. And when they are to be reminded, it's not about revenge. When you watch the show tonight, think about how revenge plays a part in how Joseph gets sold into slavery and those weird tricks that Joseph pulls on his brothers. There's revenge added in. God isn't about that. Throughout the Old Testament, when it comes to Egypt and God brings that memory to mind, he says, remember to treat the foreigners among you with kindness, for you were once foreigners in a foreign land. And so he isn't saying, remember those times when you were mistreated and let's get even. He said, remember those hard times and treat people better than you were treated. And so I think one of the things that I would have us as we see this show is to remember the choice of reconciliation over revenge. All of us have been mistreated at one time or another. All of us have known pain. But instead of seeking revenge, we know how it feels to be treated poorly. And so let's treat people with kindness. Let's treat people with compassion and hospitality.
You kind of alluded to it in that part right there. I think about this with the flaws of the everyday person. And I look at this not to make myself feel better, but when I listen to the biblical stories, and Joseph is a perfect example. Even though he's figured it out, he knows those are his brothers. He could have easily said, "I'm your brother, welcome." But instead, he chooses to put the ringer in it.
Yeah. I've heard sometimes there are some who would say, well, he was trying to judge whether they were still bad or good. I think he was just yanking them around. I don't think he was trying to measure them. I think he was trying to stick it to them because of what he had suffered. And so I don't think he was fearful of any retribution. He was the second in command in all of Egypt. He wasn't threatened by him. I think he wanted to get back.
It's one of those things where, sometimes a little brother is still going to be a little brother no matter what. And as the oldest, I don't like that. So that's okay. I think it's great that we have these stories, we have these moments to help us learn how to make ourselves better. It's not about how to change others, because we can't really control others. We can control what we do, we can control how we act, and how we behave. And in this story, for good or bad, choices are made by these individuals. And I think you see that throughout everything that we watch and see and enjoy. So,
if you're treated poorly, you are still under somebody else's power, if you will, if you continue to grieve or get angry and you relive it over and over. They still have power and sway over you. One of the best ways to kind of regain your own self in a painful situation is to be kind to them. They won't expect it. And if you're kind, if you show compassion, it kind of takes the wind out of anybody else's sails and you gain control in your own life again.
Right. For those that are entering now, I will reintroduce what we're doing right now. We are having a conversation with religious leaders we've done before every single show to learn a little bit more about the text that this show is based off of and how we can, what we can learn from these shows. When Michael was picking this show, he decided to meet with various religious leaders from around our community just to learn more about the story and what someone who is possibly Jewish would have experienced versus someone who is the Protestant faith or Catholic. And we've had religious leaders from all those different groups come in and speak earlier. So we have Reverend Wendy Lambert here today, just giving us a little bit more information about them also. We'll go to another question I have, and I think after this we will wrap it up unless you have something else you want to add. And where did I go? Oh, this is interesting. So we have this dynamic of, and we talked about the sibling dynamic and the family parallels, but are there other stories within probably the early Testament, New Testament, where we have this power struggle between brothers or family members and what's going on and how they fight through it all?
If you go back to Jacob and Esau's story, and this, I'm glad that you said that you like Esau the best.
I did.
So Jacob was rotten to Esau. He was manipulative with his mom. He was getting back at him, and Esau doesn't seem to be the brightest individual. But so much so, he was so bad to his brother that in the end, Jacob has to move away. After many years, he comes back, and being Jacob, he's so afraid that Esau is going to kill him that he puts his wives and children ahead of him in the procession back home. And he wants to kind of soften Esau before he gets there. Esau forgives his brother for everything. And so in that, Esau really was the stronger, more compassionate one. Jacob hadn't expected that from him, but Esau was the one who brought reconciliation in the end.
I think in this story and in so many other stories, there's an underlying conversation about forgiveness. And not only does the person forgive me, but also acknowledging not only that you need forgiveness, but also accepting it and being willing to receive that forgiveness. And some do it better than others in the story. So it's very interesting of how we can take a moment of know we've wronged someone or something that's been done wrong to me, but also say, I'm over that. How do we move forward? And I guess that's the next question. We see this story. How do we move forward when we hear these stories? And what's next for just us as humans and people? How we treat each other?
I think choosing each day that you're going to be a person of compassion and forgiveness. When we're compassionate, we sleep better at night because we treat people really well. And when we are people of forgiveness, we forgive people readily, then we make sure that we're not held captive by any negative emotions. It sets us free from any circumstance.
Wendy, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being my pastor. I told Wendy when I joined the church that I was joining so that she would be my pastor. And she swore me into membership at the church, and I'm thankful for that. Thankful for her being my boss at the time and friend here on the stage today. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with everybody. Thank you
so much.